I'm Patty Snow, co-owner of OsteoStrong Ashland. Kim and I want to thank everyone for your continued support and encouragement as we try to open OsteoStrong in Ashland during this crazy time. We continue to get a number of requests for presentation appointments, but given the situation, we just don't feel right having appointments one-on-one. So what we're doing is we're going to post this video that's going to walk you through the presentation. And then after you've viewed it, if you want to contact us with any other questions or comments, you're more than welcome to do so. So let's just go ahead and jump into everything. First of all, if you were to come into the center for an appointment, the first thing we would do is we'd go through a wellness assessment. Obviously, I can't do that online, but this is what the wellness assessment looks like. And we would just be asking you some questions about any physical concerns that you currently have, any challenges you're facing. We also like to get into activities that you enjoy, because OsteoStrong isn't just about building your bone strength, but we want to get you back into enjoying life 100%. So I like to hear about the activities you enjoy, if there are any hindrances to doing those activities 100%, and if so, how osteogenic loading might be able to help you. After we go through that, then we jump into the presentation. So let's get right to it. First, in case you're not aware of how OsteoStrong came to be, let me give you a real brief history. 13 years ago, Dr. John Jaquish, who's a biomedical engineer, learned that his mother, who was 70 at the time, had osteoporosis. And he knew, being a biomedical engineer, that there are many parts of our body that, if deconditioned, can be reconditioned. He also knew about something called Wolff's Law that I'll get into in just a few moments. With this knowledge, Dr. Jaquish went about creating a device that his mother could use safely in order to trigger bone growth. Being 70 years old, he knew she wasn't going to be jumping off a balance beam or doing power weightlifting, but he knew that impact was necessary in order to trigger bone strength. So he created a device that did impact emulation, so she could do it safely without hurting herself. His mom used the device for 18 months, being a good mom, and after the 18 months, they had her retested and were thrilled to find out that her osteoporosis had indeed reversed and she had gone back to normal bone density. Well, she's now in her mid-80s and they had her tested again recently and she still has normal bone health. So that's a wonderful story. How does it affect us? Well, Dr. Jaquish, now armed with this information, went back to the drawing board. And eventually that one device turned into 4 devices. Those 4 devices, they react or they work on 4 different areas of our body. And he partnered with a gentleman who had been in the fitness industry for many years, Kyle Zagrowski, who later became CEO of the company. And in 2012, they opened OsteoStrong. So OsteoStrong now has over 120 centers in the United States, and we're also in 5 other countries. So that's just a brief history of how we got started. Now let's jump into the presentation. Okay, so what is OsteoStrong and how does it work? First and foremost, OsteoStrong builds bone strength. That's the whole reason the company started. Luckily, there are also some very positive side effects that come along with strengthening your bones. First, muscle strength. As our bone strength decreases as we get older, our muscle strength also decreases. I call this the Pickle Jar Syndrome. I don't know about you, but I always prided myself on the fact that I could open any lid to any jar. And as I've gotten older, it's really ticked me off that when I go to open a pickle jar or any other jar, I have a hard time with it, and I end up having to give it to someone else to open. Good news is, as our bones strengthen, our muscles strengthen too. And I'm going to go into that in a little more detail in just a moment. One of the other positive side effects is your posture. Through one of our devices called the Postural Growth Trigger, we can actually help reverse what's called kyphosis, that hump that we often get as we get older. We can help reverse that. And then another positive side effect, and usually the very first thing people notice when they start using our devices, is improved balance. When we're younger, we're jumping all around. You're jumping off rocks and, running up and down stairs, and you never worry about your balance. As we get older, that changes. So osteogenic loading, which is what we do here at the center, along with the vibration plates that we use both at the beginning of your session and the end of your session, help dramatically improve your balance. And that's usually one of the very first things people notice. Let's see here. So I covered muscle, balance, posture, decrease joint and back pain. First, let me say, we have nothing against gyms. I think gyms are great. They serve a wonderful purpose. They serve a different purpose than OsteoStrong, but we are all for gyms, okay? That being said, when you go to a gym, you're usually pushing a weight through space, whether it be, you're doing powerlifting or whatever you're doing, or a leg press, you are actually pushing something through space. One of the issues that comes along with that is if it isn't done properly, it can cause some joint issues. Now, with osteogenic loading, you're not pushing anything through space. Everything we do is resistance-based. Our equipment is robotic musculoskeletal devices. And what that means is that it's impact emulation. So, for instance, I'm 145 pounds. So when I join, I get a little key fob that says Patty's 145 pounds. When I go up to use the device, I put that key fob on the device and it knows how much I weigh. So it knows how much to resist me. And it knows exactly where my growth trigger mark is. So there's going to be a little red line on the biofeedback display that's on every unit. And it's going to tell me that for my upper growth trigger, which is about 2.5 times my body weight, so that's going to be around 350 pounds, excuse my math if I'm off on that. So there's going to be a little red line on that biofeedback tablet. When I go up to use that upper growth trigger and I'm sitting there and I'm pushing on those handles aren't going anywhere, right? They're resisting me at my weight. So it knows I'm 145 pounds. So as I'm pushing, I'm seeing my little green line getting closer and closer and closer to that red line that's my growth trigger. Once I hit that growth trigger, all I have to do is hold that for 5 seconds to trigger bone growth. And then I do a slow release. Now, if someone that's 200 pounds comes up after me and they don't put their key fob up, they're going to go, ooh, and all of a sudden that growth trigger is going to go, woo, all the way to the end, because it still thinks that someone who's 145 pounds is pushing on it. That's why it's important that we always have an accurate weight when you get on the devices, and we program that on your key fob. But getting back to the joints, where I was going with that is that because you're pushing, everything slow in, hold, slow out. You can see that's about the full extent of movement that you're going to have. So there's really no pressure on the joints. As a matter of fact, what we're doing is we're strengthening the ligaments and tendons around the joint, so it's making it stronger. If you're someone who has bone-on-bone arthritis, what this is doing is it's holding that joint in place better, so you're not going to get so much rubbing. It's going to help decrease that pain. Many people come to OsteoStrong not because they have bone density issues, but because they have joint issues and they want relief from that joint pain. So that's one of our best benefits. Also, decrease risk of fall and injury. One of the devices we have helps strengthen your core. The reason we fall so easily as we get older is we just don't have the strength to right ourselves when we start to trip. Our balance is not as great, so we're more prone to tripping. And then when we do start to trip, we don't have the strength to right ourselves. So we correct all of that to make it so we can keep ourselves safe in case we do start to trip. And then the last thing, and one of the ones that just amazed me when I learned about it, is that we can actually help improve blood glucose levels. And I'll get into that in a little more depth in just a moment. All right. These are just a couple of testimonials. I won't go into these right now, but if you want any information, if you want to hear some really positive testimonials, just go to YouTube and Google OsteoStrong testimonials and all kinds of things come up. We've helped people obviously improve their bone strength. We've also helped people be able to get rid of canes and walkers, get back to the activities they enjoy, golfing, gardening, all kinds of things, because we can reduce those joint and back pains. So, like I said, go on to YouTube. You can hear all kinds of them. All right, let's get into the science. So, Some of this you probably remember from high school science, unless you're like me and totally spaced all that out. We have two different kinds of cells that work on our bones. One's called an osteoblast, and that helps build bone. And the other one's called an osteoclast, and that helps break down bone to put calcium in our system. So from the age of birth till about 30, our osteoblasts are up here, and our osteoclasts are down here, and we're building bone, because that's, those are our growth years, right? So we have to be. So our bones are building faster and stronger. Specifically between the ages of 13 and 18, our bones are getting stronger and stronger. It slows down a little bit after 18, but still continues to grow faster than be broken down up until the age of 30. Then we hit about 30. And now those two things, the osteoblasts and osteoclasts, are pretty much even. Then after 30, the osteoclasts start to outnumber the osteoblasts. And it happens gradually. It's not like you hit 30 and take a nosedive. But we start all losing bone at right around 1 to 2% a year. In the beginning, that's not too bad, but after 30, 40 years of that, you can see how that would build up. Also, there are certain things that can speed up that process. If you're a woman who has gone through menopause, that number actually jumps to 12 to 15% you lose in a year. If you have a family history of osteoporosis, if you're on certain medications like proton pump inhibitors such as Nexium, those can rob our bones. If you're a smoker, a drinker, if you're someone like me and you're addicted to coffee, all of those things can speed up the bone loss process. So this is what a normal bone is going to look like inside at the age of 30. It's nice and dense, and you can see there's not much air in there. Then you get to that same bone at 50. Even without all those other mitigating factors, at 50 you can see that bone is just much more porous. So what our goal is as you can see this little graph over here. So from birth to 30, we're gaining in bone strength, and then after 30, we start to slowly decline. What we want to do at OsteoStrong is to turn that around and get that bone strength going back up before you hit your fracture line. Now, fracture line is going to be different for every person, okay? I know of a woman who just recently broke her hip at the age of 93. That was her fracture line. I also have someone else who has compound fractures in their spine, and she's in her 70s. That was her fracture point. It's different for all of us. We want to get it turned around before any of us get to that fracture point. Okay, how do we do it? Adaptive response. Here again, we're getting into the science a little bit. All of us have adaptive response built into our bodies, right? It's the way we protect ourselves. I like to use the analogy that if you go outside on a really hot day, you're going to start to sweat. And it's not because you told yourself you need to sweat. It's because your brain senses your body is overheating, so it sends moisture to the surface of your skin to cool you off. Does that without us telling it to do it. It does it to protect ourselves. Well, back in the 1800s, a gentleman named Dr. Julius Wolff learned that bones actually have an adaptive response. We didn't know that before then. But through his research, he learned that if enough pressure was put on a bone end to end, the brain would sense that that bone was in danger and would actually trigger it to start growing again. They called that Wolff's Law, and doctors have been studying Wolff's Law in medical school for the last 100 years. Now, the one thing Dr. Wolff didn't know, and we actually didn't know until 2012, was how much pressure it took end to end to trigger that bone to grow. Then in 2012, a big study was done in Great Britain. And at the end of that study, what was learned is that in order to trigger bone growth in our lower extremities, so in our legs and most importantly in our hips, it actually takes 4.2 multiples of your body weight in order to trigger bone growth. So think about that. You're a little 100-pound woman. That means you would have to leg press 420 pounds in order to trigger your bones to grow. So this became a good news, bad news kind of thing for the scientific community, because now they knew what it took. But imagine if you went to your doctor and they said, yeah, you can trigger your bones to start growing again. Just go do 420 pounds of leg press. Or in my case, at my weight, it would be over 600 pounds of leg press. You know, I'd be out looking for a new doctor. So that's why they continue to tell us, do weight-bearing exercise, even though we now know that just walking or doing regular weights isn't going to do the trick. Not that it's bad for you, but it's not going to do the trick. The other thing science has taught us is the importance of these little tiny strands. Those are called myofibrils. We are all born with a finite number of muscle cells, okay? So the number you had the day you were born, same number you've got today. We can't do anything to increase the number of muscle cells. However, we have learned that osteogenic loading, that same process that can trigger our bones to grow, can also trigger to increase the number of myofibrils in our muscle cells. And here's why that's important. Myofibrils play two very important roles in our muscle cells. First, they are the contraction power of our muscle. So when you pick something up and your muscle contracts, that's actually all the myofibrils in that muscle cell contracting. So the more myofibrils you have in your muscle cell, the more contraction power you have. And that's how we actually improve strength, muscle strength, with bone strength. The other thing that myofibrils do is they are the absorption power for our muscle cells. You know, we feed our muscle cells with glucose. So when there's glucose in our bloodstream, it's the myofibrils that absorb that to feed our muscles. Now, if you're someone who has type 2 diabetes, you've got excess glucose in your bloodstream. So the more myofibrils you have, the more absorption power you have, and you can actually help turn around or reverse type 2 diabetes. That one blew my mind. So, it doesn't take much to blow my mind. All right, back to the 4.2 multiples of body weight. Traditionally, there were only two ways you could do that. Powerlifting, which I gave up long ago, or gymnastics. So, we know that gymnasts have the best bones of any athletes. And the reason being is because, you know, they're on that 4-foot balance beam and they jump off and they do their flips and bam, they hit. And when they hit, they're getting that multiple of body weight. They're on the unparalleled bars. They do the same thing, flip and hit. So every time they land like that, they're getting their multiple of body weight. They have great bones for the most part. Unfortunately, most of them have lousy joints. You know, they retire at 19 because all that force, although it's great for your bones, is not great for your joints. So what OsteoStrong and osteogenic loading does is we take that same concept of that impact, but we do it through impact emulation. All right, so let's get into this. First and foremost, osteogenic loading. It's safe for your joints. As I mentioned, whether it's on the upper growth trigger device where you're going to be seated and you're going to be holding the handlebars, that is about all the movement you're going to be doing. Same thing on the lower growth trigger. Your knees are going to move very little. On the core growth trigger, there's going to be doing a crunch motion. Again, very little movement. And on the postural, you're going to be pushing with your legs. And again, very easy on the joints. So all the benefits without the pain, no impact. Strongest position. So you will always go through your session with a coach. We never send you through by yourself. The coach is there for two reasons. First, they're there to make sure you're using the devices safely. These devices are tremendously safe, but any piece of equipment, if it's used incorrectly, can cause issues. So they're there to make sure you're using it safely. The other thing is they're there to put you in your strongest position to make sure you're getting the most out of this. So I go back to my upper growth trigger here. Your coach is going to make sure that your elbow is at 120 degrees because we know that that is going to give you the most impact bone end to bone end when you're using that device. We set you up that way on all the devices to make sure you're getting the most out of them. Maximum force, you're going to be amazed how much you can push when it's resistance based, okay? There's no way I could do a leg press of almost 800 pounds, but I can do it on the lower growth trigger. Same thing with the upper growth trigger. I can barely lift a bar that's 100 pounds, but I can do 400 pounds when I'm doing it on the osteogenic loading, and it's a resistance based. Let's see. Always with a safety coach, like I mentioned. My personal favorite, sweat-free. Quick and easy, only about 15 minutes once a week. Now, here's the reason for that. Each device you're only going to be on for about a minute and a half. When I first learned about OsteoStrong, this is the point, and excuse my French, where I cried bullshit, okay? I thought there is no way that 15 minutes once a week is going to improve my bones. I'm a born skeptic. So that sent me into doing research, and I did a lot of research. For about 6 weeks, I went down the rabbit hole of science on osteogenic loading. I finally understood how it can work. And then I went around and I started calling centers and say, tell me about your members, tell me what they've seen. And I started hearing the same types of things over and over again, which that then told me that, okay, this does work. And I've experienced it for myself. But back to the 15 minutes. So you're on each device for about a minute and a half. We do a test push. And then after we make sure everything's feeling okay, we don't believe in no pain, no gain. Again, that's a gym thing. If you're feeling pain, that's your body telling you something's wrong. So every device you get on, we have you do a test push. We say, okay, how are the shoulders feeling? How are the elbows feeling? The wrists, everything okay? All right, good, we're good to go. And then we're going to do a slow in, no impact. Slow in with your push, 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 push. When you get to the point you can't push any longer, we go ahead, count to 5, and a slow out. That's all it takes. A minute and a half on each devices. We have 4 devices. We also put you on a vibration plate at the beginning and at the end. That vibration plate is set at 30 megahertz. And the reason we set it there is because that's what science has shown us creates something called neural potentiation, which is a fancy term for it wakes up your nervous system. So we want your nervous system awake and firing on all cylinders before you go through the devices. At the end, you get back on a vibration plate to lock everything in. We have athletes that come in, and when they get on the vibration plate at the end, they'll practice a golf swing or a batting swing or whatever it may be to help lock that motion in. So, start to finish, 15 minutes. All right. And these are what the devices look like. This one is called the upper growth trigger. That's the one I've kind of been demonstrating here. That's going to help build bone in your arms and in your upper body. This one down here is called the core growth trigger. It's going to help you build bone in your pelvis, also your rib cage, and strengthen your core. Very important. Helps protect your spine. This one over here is the lower growth trigger. Lower growth trigger is going to help you build bone strength in your legs and most importantly in your hips. It's vitally important that we protect our hips. Sadly, the statistic is that for people over 50, specifically women with osteoporosis, who fall and experience a fracture in their hip, the mortality rate for that is extremely high, so about 50%. So we like to keep our hips safe at all costs. And then there's this one over here. That's the postural growth trigger. We always do the postural growth trigger last. These others we can kind of do in any order, but I want your body firing on all cylinders before you get onto the postural growth trigger. That one is going to work the entire kinetic chain of your body. And it's the only one we do standing up. So when you're standing up, we're going to have you overemphasize good posture, as if you're trying to squeeze something between your shoulder blades. You're going to have your arms down at your side. The bars are going to be right at your fingertips, so you can't quite grab them. I'm going to have you act as if you're sliding down a wall, because I don't want you bending forward to grab those bars. So you're going to act like you're sliding down a wall. You're going to grab the bars. Your knees are going to be slightly bent at this point. And then when your coach directs you, you're going to try and stand up, using your feet pressing into the floor, not trying to use your arms pulling up. Using your feet pressing into the floor, you're going to try and stand. And again, it's slow in, hold for 5, slow out. And what this does is it's going to trigger, as I said, the entire kinetic chain. So starting at the base of your skull, working all the way down your spine. This is where we're going to build the bone strength in your spine, through your hips, your legs, down into your heels. This is also the device that helps with that kyphosis. It's going to help you get your posture back. Now, each one of the machines is going to have a tablet that gives you immediate biofeedback. So on there, you're going to know when you hit your growth trigger mark. And that's all the devices. So if you have any questions, we would love to answer. any thoughts you have, help you out, please feel free to give us a call. I'm going to post both our center phone number and our center email address on this posting, so you'll know how to get hold of us. And we will also be happy to send you out a wellness assessment if you'd like to fill one out in the comfort of your home and then send it back to us. We look forward to meeting each and every one of you once this is done. We look forward to opening our center. And again, thank you so much for your support. Bye-bye.